All right, good morning, everyone, and welcome. We're going to give folks just like 20 or 30 seconds to all make sure they're all joined in from the waiting room. But I'll start with introductions. We're happy you're here today. My name is John Schultz. I run NetStrategies marketing agency out of Tyson's. With me is a colleague and someone that I've worked with a lot over the years, Merritt Green, who's managing partner at General Counsel. So together, we've got each 25 years of experience in our industries, and that's what we're bringing to bear today to help you understand how you can combat online defamation. So happy to be doing this with you, Merritt.
Likewise.
Great.
Likewise.
So let's just kind of frame things up, because this is a really important issue, and I think it's no surprise, given the stress and strain of the last year, that more and more people are mad online. And you know, this is a trend that's been happening, but it's accelerated, I think, with COVID. And yes, certain industries get hammered from time to time, but like, for instance, last year during COVID, airlines got a 300% increase in negative reviews online. Hotel negative reviews doubled. You know, potentially a lot of those things were having to do with COVID and safety and things like that. But it does show you that people are willing to, you know, get online and complain. And the trick here is understanding from a business and legal perspective what really ought to be done and what's the best way to address it. But really, something to always keep in mind is a lot of people these days will forego a confrontation and just log on and post how they're feeling, what they think, those types of things. And a great example, Chef Jacques from L'Auberge Chez Francois here in Great Falls, Virginia, he mentioned that, you know, he always wants to know if someone had a bad experience right at the table. He wants to fix it right at the table. There's not too much he can do once somebody gets on Open Table or Yelp and complains. You know, he can reach out, and certainly they handle issues very well there. But, you know, business owners would love for you to, you know, talk about it while you're there. Unfortunately, a lot of people just log on. Okay. And no doubt people have legitimate complaints. It's a customer who had a bad experience, something didn't happen right. The tough thing we're dealing with these days is it's not always a customer. It's not always our fault as a business. Sometimes there's just bad actors out there. It could be a disgruntled ex-employee. It could be a competitor. It could be someone with a hidden agenda that has an axe to grind. And so we really need to kind of keep up on what's happening with our online reputation. We need to understand what defamation is and what other strategies are available. And we need to address them. And we need to address them without making the problem worse. And that's one of the things I think that we're going to bring to you today. So I'm going to weave through here some client examples because I think it's easier to understand these things if you know the examples. So for instance, we've worked with a big government contractor who was getting criticized because of alleged employee behavior. You know, 30,000 employees around the world, you know, somebody might behave badly or somebody might be alleged to behave badly. So that, you know, they've had to deal with things like that. You know, 1-star reviews for a luxury home remodeler. I think everybody who does consumer services will get a review like that from time to time. What do you do? Or maybe you're a CEO, an executive who's been personally attacked online or thinks potentially they're going to be attacked over something. Those are the type of real world examples that we need to be aware of and understand how to address. So what we're going to cover today is understanding the difference between defamation and criticism. And Merritt's got a lot of great information about legal definitions and what to keep in mind when you're looking at what's happening with your reputation. We're going to talk about how to protect yourself, and that's before attacks happen and after. So we all hope we don't have to deal with the after. We both have, I think, great information about how to protect yourself from the before as well. Of course, Merritt's going to cover legal strategies for addressing defamation. I'm also going to cover communication strategies for improving your whole digital footprint, because these things don't happen, you know, in a vacuum. It's not just, you know, some Yelp 1-star reviews. You know, there's more to the picture related to how you manage a company's reputation. So does that sound good to you, Merritt?
That sounds great. Very good overview. Thank you.
All right, so let's start with a definition, so everybody's on the same page related to what defamation is.
Great, and we'll go through these relatively quickly. Obviously, if you have any questions, I think John said you can use the chat function, and we'll look at that. And we're also going to try to make it as interactive as possible, so it is as interesting as possible, and also weave in those real-world examples. So,
and
defamation.
We'll put our email addresses up again at the end. I know some folks might be a little sensitive with this topic, so if you feel free to ask questions in chat or reach out to us, via email or phone too.
Absolutely. And just a plug, we do have a whole bunch of information on defamation on our website. Articles that you can look at, videos that you can see. So please consider looking at our website afterwards also. Defamation, it's a false statement of fact. And I think there are two parts there. It's false and it's a statement of fact, issued as fact. It's not an opinion. That's published or communicated to another person. So you don't keep it to yourself. You put it out on the internet, you yell it from a rooftop, you're talking to people about it. That causes injury to the reputation of the subject of the statement. So you have a few elements there. It's a false statement of fact, published or communicated, that causes injury. All right, let's go ahead to the next slide.
Okay.
Oops. So what's not defamation? Oh, there we go. All right. So the opposite of what is defamation? Pretty easy. The statement is true. So someone might say something really, really horrible about you, but if it's true, it's not going to be defamation, and we really can't do anything from a legal perspective most of the time to help you. And then what's also not defamation is it's a statement of opinion. So again, it could be a really horrible statement, but if it's not someone's opinion, it's generally not going to be considered defamation. It's not going to be actionable legally.
Okay. So, and
I think we have some examples on the next slide.
Yeah.
So why don't we go through some of these? So, not defamatory. The food at this restaurant tastes like roadkill. That is someone's opinion. Defamatory. The food at this restaurant tastes terrible. So that part is, opinion. But they use spoiled meat and rotten eggs in their dishes. So that is a statement. They're issuing it as a statement of fact. You can prove that it is false. It's published, and it can cause injury to that restaurant. So that would be considered legal defamation, and you could bring a lawsuit or other legal action about it. Not defamatory. The owners of this company are the biggest jerks in the world. Maybe absolutely true, maybe false. They could be, Mother Teresa, but if it's someone's opinion, then it is not going to be a defamation. And then the final one, defamatory. The owners of this company deliberately harass, demean, and insult their customers. Again, that is issued as a statement of fact and can be proven false. So that could be defamatory. Although, and as John and I will go into a little bit, there's a lot of gray area with defamatory statements. So it's hard to prove sometimes, which really leads us, I know, into the next slide. So one of the elements that we talked about in a defamation case, and as we'll talk about in a second, there are two types of defamation. There's defamation, white bread defamation, if you will, plain and simple, and then there's defamation per se. But we'll go into defamation per se in a second.
Okay.
But for regular defamation, it's a statement of fact that's false, and it has to provide injury. So in proving injury in an online defamation case, you must show that the defamatory statement caused injury to the reputation of the subject of the statement. And that can be difficult to do sometimes, because oftentimes you'll have anonymous posts, or you won't even know who sees the post. So it's something to consider, and something that we as attorneys have to work through with clients that come to us as it relates to defamation. You need to be able to show that you're a restaurant, there was a post about using rotten eggs, and then thereafter you can analytically with numbers show that your business went down, that people who used to frequent your restaurant did not come. That's showing the economic injury.
Well, and how about a case where it's a 1-star review, it's got something defamatory in it, but there's no replies to it, there's no sharing of it, there's no screenshots. How would you prove that that defamed you, if not financials or otherwise? I mean, would people sometimes show up and if someone showed up at a restaurant and said, I read this online and I'm not going to eat here anymore, is that enough to prove that it hurt the reputation of the business?
I think, first of all, people probably aren't going to show up and say, I read this review, I'm not going to eat here. I think really the only way you'd prove injury in that circumstance is to look at your revenue, for the month before the online review, and look at your revenue the following month.
Okay.
Compare March 2020 to March 2021, and you'd have to look at those numbers because you need to prove that injury, which, leading directly into defamation per se, that's what makes defamation per se a better cause of action in defamation cases, because as we talk about here, you don't need to prove damages. You don't need to prove your injury when you have a defamation per se case. So it makes proving defamation from a legal matter easier. So what you have is defamation per se is when a statement imputes commission of a criminal offense involving moral turpitude, which is a fancy way of saying, they did a moral illegal act. It imputes unfitness to perform the duties of an office of employment for want of integrity in the charge of such duties. If you don't like your CPA and you post something on Yelp or on their Google reviews that say, my CPA is horrible, I have no doubt that he was embezzling and stealing from all of his clients. You know what? That's going to be defamation per se, and you can bring a legal action based on that statement alone because it shows unfitness or want of integrity. It also probably qualify for the third category, which is it prejudices a person in their profession or trade. It is, hurting them in what they're doing. That might come up sometimes with doctors, CPAs, other professionals. This architect is so bad, he can't even draw a straight line. It may or may not be enough just because someone may know it's being sarcastic.
Yeah.
But the idea there is that it prejudices that person in the profession or trade. What just hopped into my mind is, you're defaming a priest. Not that anyone would probably do that, but you're saying that that priest is probably a frequent visitor to the local massage parlor. That could prejudice that person in their profession or trade. It would probably be defamatory in that regard, of course, unless it's true. And then it imputes an infection of some contagious disease. And I think this next slide goes through some examples of these.
Yes.
So here are some examples. The owner of this company embezzled money from his church. So that is a crime of moral turpitude. So next is the interior decorator's colorblind. He's so he's unable to accurately match colors. So that's unfitness to perform duties of their job. Dr. Smith was the worst student in his entire med school class. Again, that is prejudice the person in the profession or trade. Again, unless it was true.
Right. So would it count if Dr. Smith was at the bottom of his class? Would that count?
He wasn't the worst. No. If he was in fact the worst student, he was number 99 out of 99 students. Truth is a defense.
Yeah.
So you have that truth as a defense.
Okay.
And then Bob the contractor has swine flu, or more locally, now has COVID. Don't let him near your house. By saying that it imputes the infection of some contagious disease, and that is another type of defamation per se. Yeah. So for as lawyers, when someone comes to us with a potential defamation case, when we could use these 4 categories and we could show that something is defamation per se, it's a much easier case because you don't need to prove that injury. And quite honestly, it's also probably more likely to be causing injury to the person that is suffering the defamation. So there's probably more action that we can take on your behalf.
Yeah. Now, what's interesting is some of these statements potentially could also have, cause somebody like Google or Yelp to remove a review. So things that are prejudice or, we'll cover the details on that. But something to keep in mind is it's not a foregone conclusion that a review is forever if it is, outside of what these companies will allow to be posted, and we'll talk about that. But I guess the other thing that's interesting, Merritt, is I guess your average person doesn't always understand the difference between defamation and defamation per se. So there could be more postings like this out there that have just been made, that people could contest either legally or with with Google or Yelp or some such. Just important to know these definitions so that you don't get caught up in something and throw your hands up and say there's nothing that can be done.
Yeah, absolutely. Both as a business and defending your business. So knowing where you might have legal rights and what you can do. So you can identify, all right, is this an opinion? If it's an opinion, it's probably not going to be defamation, or most likely defamation per se.
Right.
But again, there are going to be those gray areas. If you say, it's my opinion that the owner of this company is so crooked, he's probably embezzling money from his church. That's sort of straddling the line between, saying it's my opinion, and opinion statements are generally not considered defamation, but then you're going forward and saying something that is defamation per se, and talking about embezzlement.
Yeah.
So you need to be careful and recognize that and go through the analysis.
Right.
So, and it's also, it's also important not only to think about what you can do to protect your business, but also conversely, everyone that's here participating, listening to this today, you need to be careful in what you say and do, because the last thing you want is to have someone bring a defamation action against you.
Absolutely.
If you're a business and you're using let's keep picking on CPA firms, and you're not happy with the work done by your CPA firm, or you're not happy with the work done by your financial advisor. God forbid you're not happy with the lawyer that you've worked with. You need to figure out what you can say online that won't get you in trouble with defamation.
Right. Okay.
All right, taking legal action against online defamation. So there are a few different steps that you should do to make sure that we're addressing it properly. So number one, you identify the attacker. Who's behind the pseudonym? Why are they attacking you? And as we'll talk about a little bit, it's sometimes hard to identify who that is. And we'll talk about that a little bit more within the next slide. But the first thing you want to try to do is identify who it is. Lots of times you'll know, lots of times, someone could just be using a fake name. Then number two, determine the responses that are available to you and appropriate for the situation. Do you need to sue? Can you sue? So number one, and as we talk to clients in these matters, lots of times legal action will be the final result, the last result. Number one, you want to try to use softer, more gentle methods to get the person to remove the post, to work out the relationship, to apologize, to give a discount, to give a credit to the restaurant, whatever it may be. That should be for a business always the first step. And that's something that I'm sure John and I would talk to you as a business matter, since we both own our own businesses and have been dealing with this for 20 plus years.
Right.
But that is always the first step.
And I think what we're saying is, fights can be expensive in a lot of ways, not just maybe with dollars and time, but also, make things kind of spin out of control or make things worse. So, important to understand these definitions and when to pull the trigger on something big if someone's really been damaged, if it's defamation per se, or are there some things that we can invest in prior in order to keep customers happy and maybe avoid some of these situations?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you always hear the horror stories, and what you absolutely want to avoid as a business is, okay, you have a disgruntled former employee, you have a disgruntled client or customer, they post something on Yelp, and then that business owner, attacks that person online. They say that this person was horrible, the customer is wrong, whatever it is. And then what happens is that former employee or that former customer starts a website called johnsrestaurantreallysucks.com and just escalates the whole thing. So now when you go to John's Restaurant, the first page of Google is johnsrestaurantsucks.com, and that's what you want to avoid.
Yeah.
And you
Well,
want to avoid that. There's those sort of 3 different ways to avoid all of this. Number one, being a good, responsible business and
right.
using those soft skills towards your clients and customers. Number 2, it's everything that John and NetStrategies will talk to you about. And then as a last resort, it's some of the legal issues.
Well, I think it's interesting you brought up that, johnsrestaurantsucks.com, because what everybody needs to understand is there's so many things you can do on the internet, and maybe a review, gets yanked because it goes against terms of service for Yelp. Great. Well, that doesn't mean somebody else couldn't try something. There's a myriad of things that they could do if they really have an axe to grind, and that's where you get into a broader effort on reputation management and other things, which we'll talk about. So I'm glad you brought that up.
John will talk about this a little bit more, but I've had lots of circumstances where businesses have tried to get, and you've probably seen this with Yelp more than any other online organization. Yelp is not going to take down reviews lots of times unless you can prove that is defamation, and that's where we as attorneys have worked with clients to show that we're filing a lawsuit, and then Yelp will bring something down.
Yeah.
But otherwise, it's free speech.
And that's a good point. I'll talk about some of the things that could get a review taken down, but generally speaking, ISPs and operators of social channels and other content, publishers, they're not going to give up info or take content down if it doesn't violate their policies without a court order. Unless they can see that there's fraud involved. And we've had some issues where people set up a fake site to try to do a job scam for a big company, things like that. Those can get taken down, if you know the right process to go through. But generally speaking, a lot of times you do need a court order to handle it, and that's tough, but it's the reality of how this works. So let's keep going here. So
and that leads us actually very well into the next slide, which is identifying the attacker. So they can come from a lot of sources that we've talked about: the unhappy customers, current and former employees, competitors, and lots of times it's easy to identify it, but oftentimes you may not be able to. So what we've also been able to do for our clients, and there was a case with Hadid Carpet Service a number of years ago within Fairfax County Circuit Court, where there were anonymous posts. I believe they were on Yelp, and the business wanted to get these defamatory, and they were clearly defamatory statements about the company. They were false. Let's assume that they were, textbook defamation, but they didn't know who did it. Yelp would not take them down, without sort of legal order or process. So a John Doe lawsuit was filed in the Fairfax Circuit Court. With that lawsuit being filed, they were then able to issue subpoenas to Yelp. And then based on those subpoenas, Yelp was forced to identify the individuals who were taking the defamatory action, and you were able to get the post down. So that is something that we'll have to do. Oftentimes it won't go that far. Once we issue the lawsuit or issue the subpoena to Yelp, they'll oftentimes just take the post down, then go through the litigation process, but it is something that you can do. This is also a time just very quickly to talk about, as its current and former employees, in the 20 some years I've been practicing law, my primary representation of clients is on employment matters. So dealing with employees, oftentimes we'll have separation agreements for employees. one of the things that we always have in place in a separation agreement is a non-disparagement agreement. So, if you have that non-disparagement agreement for an employee that is separating, perhaps you're giving them a small separation payment, you have that defamation or non-disparagement clause therein, that provides you the additional tool, a contractual tool to stop any defamation, and that's very important to have.
Yeah, so to put a point on this, and of course I'm not a lawyer, but I've been through some of these issues myself. And what you're saying, Merritt, is, outside of a legal issue with defamation, there's a bunch of things a company can do, either operations or with employment agreements or things like that, to help prevent some of these things from happening, right? And you really need to work with someone who, and really be aware of the things that upfront you could handle to make sure these don't become issues.
No, absolutely. There are things you can do if you're really a B2C business. We've had some clients who have put non-disparagement within some of their contracts. It really depends on the business. If you're a dry cleaning restaurant, or a dry cleaning business or a restaurant, you really can't do that. But if you're a junk hauling company, that has a formal contract that's used, you might be able to put a non-disparagement clause therein, at the beginning of the relationship. We've seen it done some, not all the time. You can't necessarily do it with employees with an employment agreement, because there are rights for under the National Labor Relations Act for communication among employees, but it's something to consider to protect the business.
Okay.
Let's see. We talked about this one. I think it's next slide.
Great.
All right. As lawyers, we have different tools. Defamation is one of those tools that we'd have to get rid of these disparaging comments on the internet. But we have other tools that we can use also. So one, as we just talked about, for an employee, it's the breach of contract, the breach of fiduciary duties, or conspiracy. For a customer, it can be conspiracy also. And before John asked the question, conspiracy, how it would come up in the circumstances, two or more individuals collaborating to really try to do damage or, illegal action, wrongful action against the business. So, if you have a concerted action of, let's say, 3 or 4 employee customers, and let's say for whatever reason, they want to go after a restaurant and try to damage its reputation, and together they're posting defamatory statements, that may not only be defamation, but could rise to the level of a statutory conspiracy. And the benefit of that is attorney's fees, treble damages. It is much scarier to be sued. No one wants to be sued anyway, but if you're sued with potential punitive or treble damages, it's much worse.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is for competitors. For a competitor, you would not only have potential defamation, but you can have unfair competition claims. You could have tortious interference. If they are trying to interfere with your ongoing business relationships, trying to interfere with your contractual expectations, that could potentially be an additional cause of action. May not exist all of the time, but is additional things that we could do beyond just a straight defamation action.
Okay. I think what's interesting about these concepts, you talk about it, it's not just defamation, but it could be conspiracy, breach of fiduciary, is that's like the stack of issues, and what's funny is someone sees a bunch of things they're getting sued for, they think there's, potential, more damages, attorney's fees, stuff like that. The other side of the stack is we can make a kind of stack of positive content or other types of things that sort of crowds out. And I'm teasing you with that. We're still talking about the legal things, but the idea that you could legally, drop something that's more substantial on someone because of their horrible content, their horrible, behavior, that's good. The positive side of it is we've got some tools to set up a stack that benefits us from a digital communication standpoint. So we'll talk about that. But let's keep going on.
Absolutely. Let's you can go on to the next slide, but that's absolutely correct. And what our goals are as lawyers, at least our goals here as attorneys at General Counsel, we represent a lot of employers, businesses, nonprofits, is we want to resolve the issue as quickly and as easily as possible. So very rarely will it go to litigation. Most of the times what's going to happen is we will send a cease and desist letter. And from there, we'll negotiate with legal counsel for the other side, and we'll come to a resolution. And that is the goal. Again, litigation is often a last resort. So responding to online defamation, we went into the next slide. As I was just talking about, first step, and probably even before cease and desist letter, it's doing that investigation. It's everything else that we've talked about. It's trying to resolve it without a cease and desist letter, without that conflict, trying to win the customer or client over. Can you bring a lawsuit? So causes of action that you can bring. We've already talked about defamation per se, some of the other causes of action you could bring, breach of contract, conspiracy, those are all different things that you could have. You need to think about what defenses does the person have that made the statement. And you also need to think about anytime you consider a dispute, are they going to fight? Are they going to say, it's my opinion, so it's not defamation? Are they going to say it's not defamation per se? So you need to prove injury and damages. You need to do, and again, as attorneys, our job is to help you think through the process, to help you think through, does it make sense to bring a lawsuit here? What's going to happen? What would we do if we were defending the alleged defamer? And what's going to be the outcome? So the goal is to resolve it as quickly and inexpensively as possible. Sometimes bringing a lawsuit is going to make that happen, but you need to take it step by step. Jurisdiction.
Yeah, I think to say this a slightly different way, and actually, Merritt, it's one of the things I've appreciated about working with you over the years is, the legal piece is important. You need great people, but you need lawyers who also think like business people and understand it's not just, hey, we gotta make this stop. We gotta drop a lawsuit on somebody. There's a bunch of other questions here that you're talking about that mean, is this really a good business move? Because there's potential complexities, right?
Absolutely. Oftentimes, you're driving around Florida or other places and you see big billboards of Mike the Hammer Smith, I'm a lawyer for you.
Yeah.
Lawyers have lots of hammers in their toolbox, but oftentimes using the hammers, the last thing you should do to successfully represent a business. It goes to the name of our law firm. We try to be that general counsel to our clients. It's not just being a hammer, it's helping them be a partner with their business.
Right.
And that goes to sort of the last point on the slide, which is, what are your goals? Your goals here are halt the activity, get cooperation from the service provider, get your business back to where it was before the statement was made, to get rid of the damage, to be able to go back to the status quo, and concentrate on successful operation of your business opposed to getting rid of some of these attacks.
Right. Okay.
We've already talked about this a little bit, lawsuit or letter, what's better? And again, as we've almost said, sometimes the best thing to do is to have a more restrained approach. Send that cease and desist letter, and resolve it that way, provide them an incentive to halt their defamatory attacks, and oftentimes the business won't want the permanent record that litigation can leave. Lawsuits are going to be public record. So someone does a Google search on Joe's Restaurant and they filed a lawsuit, in federal court or state court to bring against defamation action. that can be public record and available to all sorts of folks. So it is something to consider. It's something that I know government contractors in particular are extraordinarily sensitive of. They want to make sure that that is not out there. So as we've talked about, litigation really should be a secondary tactic, and it should only be done when it's really sort of warranted.
Hey, I'm gonna Merritt, we're gonna just pause for a sec because there's been some questions asked in the questions tab. And one of them was, do you have the employee sign a disparagement agreement upon employment or when they're leaving the company? I guess that's an anti-disparagement agreement, but can you do it at the start, or would you normally be doing it when, with a severance agreement?
You have to be really careful doing it at the start. And there's been so there's the National Labor Relations Act, and most businesses will never hear about or deal with the National Labor Relations Act, but it provides certain rights to employees, Section 7 rights, and it's the rights to engage in collective action. And really, a lot of people think of it as it deals with unions, but it also provides non-unionized employees' rights. And one of those is the right to talk about the business and your relationship with the business and the wages that you're paid. So I think having your employees at the commencement of their employment sign a non-disparagement agreement is not something that you can do because it would most likely violate Section 7 rights of National Labor Relations Act.
Okay.
When someone's going, and in particular, if it's part of a separation agreement, then absolutely you should have it in place.
Okay, very good, good.
I think, and just sort of a middle ground is, and again, there's been a lot of litigation within the National Labor Relations Board about this, is what you can have in an employee handbook governing employee speech.
Right.
You can put certain reasonable restrictions in there, but it has to be measured.
Okay. Hey, let's keep moving. That was a great answer, Merritt, Bradford. Hopefully that helped you out. Let's keep moving here because we're actually, I knew we had a lot of material to cover. So are we next slide or this slide, Merritt?
Let's see here. The next slide.
Okay.
Responding to internet defamation, what's the desired result? You know what? We've already really spoken a lot of this. We want to get them to take down the defamatory content. We want to make sure that the damage that's been done happens. So number one, if you can get that done through, voluntary, amicable interactions, that's great. If it has to be done through a cease and desist letter, that's the next step. If you have to get an injunction, that's what we could do also. And then the other tool that we have is going to Yelp or the service provider to have them remove the defamatory materials also. So these are all things that we can do, and it's sort of a progression of what we would do to get that information removed.
Great. Okay.
When do you need a lawyer? Well, quite honestly, I think everyone needs a lawyer. If you are a business owner and you're watching this video and you don't have sort of your go-to law firm when you have an employment issues, a contract review, anything else, please contact us. We think everyone should have a lawyer. But as it relates to defamation, you want to prevent it from happening. So that's through the customer service. That's through potential contracts with employees or customers, and then when something happens, you contact us. So I think that's pretty straightforward.
Yeah. Okay.
And I think the same one, and again, I think we've talked about a lot of this, after a defamatory attack has occurred, as we've said, lawyers should not necessarily be your first line of defense. You want, as a business owner, to try to remedy it. Now, again, if it is an extreme result, it is you're a CPA firm and someone has made postings and started an attack saying they stole all of our money, they filed horrible taxes, and they moved to Brazil. Well, you probably want to go on the attack with a cease and desist, and you may even want to go straight to litigation as first step. Every circumstance is different, and that's part of what our job as attorneys is to look at the facts, look at your business, and determine the best course forward.
Right. Okay.
And what
All right,
we'll
great.
always do as lawyers is say, yes, we can help you, but simultaneously, you need to talk to John Schultz of NetStrategies.
Yeah, which happens from time to time. So, well, let's Merritt, thank you for the legal stuff. And I'm gonna, if you have questions while I'm presenting my material, please chime in. But we're gonna just shift now into, what a company can do to help themselves and help their online reputation. Probably everybody on this call has left at least one review somewhere. We check our own reviews from time to time. Some of us, bigger, more established companies might actually have some tools to monitor reviews and tell us, sentiment analysis. Something that we use a fair amount for some of our bigger clients is something called Brand 24, which lets us track company names and social mentions and reviews and things like that. And give us an idea of what's happening with a company on social media and other things like that. The fact is, removing reviews is tough, and also getting positive reviews is not easy. So I want to give you some tools for both. And one of the things to understand is the criteria that, like, for instance, Google and Yelp have for removing reviews is pretty challenging. You basically, they will remove something if they think, for example, a spouse of an owner or employee posted a review about their own company. That's a huge no-no. What's interesting about Google's technology is they see a lot more than what we realize too. So someone might think, well, I'll just set up a fake screen name, I'll do this, I'll do that. It's just not a good policy, because there are ramifications if Google points you out, and particularly people who are in leadership positions, as bad actors. But other things, threats, violence, harassment, hate speech, those types of things would get a review taken down. A privacy issue, if there's personal info that may put a customer or employee at risk, then usually that can get taken down. Google has automated technology to remove spam from reviews. Sometimes someone may post, this company was horrible, and then I hired this other company and they did a great job. They have tools to see if that's spam or if they think someone is advertising for another company in the context of reviews. If you see a comment like that, interestingly enough, you can go through Google channels to try to get it taken down. They ultimately, they have technology that'll review. They try to do a lot of stuff on an ongoing or automated basis, but they'll also, sometimes there's eyes on something and they actually will remove. And I'll give you a couple examples. We had a client who's in commercial HVAC, and somebody posted a review which actually said that was a complaint about a truck, one of their trucks driving too slow. So obviously not a customer, obviously not related to the business. We were able to get that taken down. Another instance, somebody said, I didn't do business with this company, but then mentioned a few things about a conversation they had. So according to their criteria, they weren't a customer. So that was able to get removed. Last thing is, if and again, this will happen because there's a lot of bad actors out there. If a review is copied from somewhere or non-original, it can also get removed too. So these are part of the tools in the toolbox to remember. Just because there's a 1-star review out there doesn't mean it's going to stick around forever. It's still tough, but you have to know these things, and different sites like Yelp or Facebook or other things have different criteria. So you kind of have to work through that. And in as much as you can quote their own policies when you contact them, and we do this many times a year. You have to be laser focused about how you actually contact them about those things. So we can help with that too.
Have you found that, John, that one of the companies is more amenable to removing reviews than others? Is Yelp the hardest, or is Yelp or Google or Facebook?
I think Yelp is the most challenging, and I won't speculate as to why, but I think Google, as an 800-pound gorilla, has invested a lot in AI and technology that helps them weed things out, and they're a little bit more responsive on certain things. Just one of those things. It's basically, the thing I tell people is it's a lot easier to get great reviews than it is to remove bad reviews, even if you know the criteria. So I don't want to defame Yelp though, Merritt. So you're going to have to tell me if I'm
you're safe for now.
Okay. You think I'm okay?
That's just your opinion.
Yeah. Okay, great. All right. All right. So responding to reviews, I've got a great example of this, but generally speaking, it's not good to just leave 1-star reviews sitting out there and do nothing about them. What people think is that you don't care, and that maybe you're not responsive, and maybe there's going to be another experience like that. So there's a good way to handle this, and that is be brief and to the point. You can acknowledge the issue if appropriate. You can acknowledge the issue without even, saying, if you think that maybe what is in the review is not completely accurate, you can acknowledge, we're sorry you feel you've had a bad experience with us, but we'd like to address it with you. That goes a long way, okay? And that's part of this apologizing judiciously. You want to make sure that it's worded in such a way that you're not necessarily admitting to the world that what the reviewer said exactly is the way it went down, because we all know that that's there's two sides to many stories. The other thing to think about is, if you're going to respond to reviews, don't just respond to negative ones. You can respond and say, hey, we appreciate your business. It was great, smaller companies, it was great to do business with you. It's great to see you last week, something like that. People like to see that engagement. And with us behind our computers a lot more, in the last year especially, people notice these things. People look at these things. So let me give you a concrete example of a response that I think was handled well. So this is a 1-star review a few years back. Person went to get some pizza in the summertime, and I think it was a college town. All the students are gone, or most of the students are gone, so the service was slow. Ultimately didn't get to eat. So what was the response? We apologize for the service, basically acknowledging the problem, short and sweet. Explaining the situation, not as an excuse, but just as a point of info. Service is unpredictable in the summer without our students. We hope we can do better next time. Okay, there's probably more to this. I didn't click on the read, or there could have been more to this related to a message getting sent, because you can reply and send messages through some of these platforms as well. But I think this is a good example, and I think business owners need to consider this as a way to diffuse a situation and make it better. Okay.
And John, I think that's important to emphasize. It's diffusing the situation. It's not being confrontational. It's not telling the reviewer that they're wrong. And I don't know if you have strategies for someone where it is defamation, how you respond. But what you don't want is egg them on so that they respond again. Submit another review and sort of get into an online fight with you, because that's just going to garner a whole bunch, where maybe they've just done Yelp and now they're going to Google, Facebook, and Bing and posting reviews.
Yeah, and there's been situations. I was interested that you brought up the conspiracy issue, because there have been instances where folks get together and decide that they're going to post a bunch of negative reviews in a bunch of different places, and that's pretty sketchy. It might be something that you want to talk to a lawyer about. You still have to kind of go through some of these steps. And Merritt, I think the interesting thing is, yes, you don't want to escalate online. You want to try to button up the situation as best you can. And then there's also some other things which we're going to touch on. I'm going to plow ahead just because we're actually coming up on the hour here in about 10 minutes. Gaining great reviews. Merritt mentioned this, and I can't overemphasize this. If a company operates well and they're really committed to customer service, it makes it a lot harder for people to get really, really upset. When you handle problems at the right time, in the right way, it can really solve a lot of problems. The other thing is, everyone who has 5-star customer service Every time every time you hear My Pleasure at Chick-fil-A, they have raised the bar on customer service in that segment. And you have to understand that if you're getting out hustled on that, chances are your reviews and your reputation are gonna be impacted. And the question then is, wow, how do we operationalize that? Okay, we think we've got good customer service, or we know we've got great customer service. How do we actually operationalize it? And I went through this with one of my remodeling clients, which was we tried some of these services that would help send reminders about reviews and asking for reviews and things like this. Some of them work great, and especially at scale, something like Bird Eye helps. But he only did about 20, 25 big projects a year, so he really didn't have that many people he needed to touch. What he ended up doing was tying the project manager bonus, or one aspect of the project manager bonus, into whether or not they got a 5-star review. Okay, so think about what that does. That puts the pressure on the project manager. There's a financial piece to it. If you have great communication, you have a great relationship, and you sort of set up that I'm going to be asking you for a review, and our goal is 5-star service. And if I'm not delivering you 5-star service at any time during this project, I want you to tell me, because when we're done and I bring you a bottle of champagne to celebrate, I'm going to be asking you to write that review. Okay, so what happened? He went from a handful of reviews to basically 15 or 20 within the next 6 months, because he operationalized it. And that's something that's a great idea. You don't need a fancy pants lawyer or a fancy pants marketing consultant to do that. You just need to kind of sit down and buckle down with your team and realize how important it is. So I do want to mention something like Bird Eye, which is, if you think about people have CRM systems, this is almost a CRM for your reputation management. It's a pretty interesting, useful tool. What I would say is, if you have 500 or 1,000 customer reactions that you want to track and try to get reviews on, you want to start thinking about systems like this as well. Okay, next thing is, and this is just really important, is the big picture of how the internet works and how digital reputation works is that it's not just reviews, and it's not just the content that you post on your website. There are social properties, and if you're active on social properties and you post on social properties, whether it's LinkedIn or Twitter or Facebook, there's videos. If you have a YouTube channel, there's news releases, there's other things like that. If you're big enough and you have a Wikipedia entry, those are all part of your internet presence, and those all have to be monitored, and those all have to be managed. But you can also think about how you could leverage those as well if you start to have an issue where there's negative content coming up, not just reviews, but other things. And one of the things to think about related to this is you have to kind of think like Google in this case, all right? Google's not interested in just, if you type in, for instance, NetStrategies, you're gonna find my company, but you're not gonna find a bunch of other pages from my company. You're gonna find another company in Australia named NetStrategies. You're gonna find another company in Texas named NetStrategies. Google wants to show some variations in the content, because what they're trying to say is, we're not sure if you're looking for this company. We think you might be because you're in Tyson's, but we're not sure, so we're going to show you more. Okay, so that has some ramification for people who get into more complicated reputation management issues, where you can leverage things like, if you don't have a Twitter account, if you don't post on LinkedIn or Medium, or you don't have a company profile on LinkedIn, or if it's inactive. Sometimes bigger situations involve a much broader based campaign, and even things like, for example, if you do a lot of hiring and your jobs are listed on several different sites like Indeed or places like that, chances are those might come up on page 1, depending on how they're managed, how they're posted, things like that. So if you start seeing other negative information in your search results, there's this whole tool bag of, hey, there's authoritative sites out there where people post content, where I can post content, and there's an opportunity to kind of cast a wider net. Okay, and even things like press releases, which don't really work for SEO, they can actually work for reputation management. They can kind of even send local signals to Google about your presence in the market, but also show up. If Google decides that there's enough and they have a little news tab on page 1 and it's mostly or all of good coverage that you've gained or that you've sent through press releases, that can help as well. So we didn't have a huge amount of time today to unpack this in a big way, but I did want to tell you that this concept of crowding out negative content is much easier than trying to get it removed. Okay, so think about that. If you operationalize getting good reviews, if you monitor them, or if you work with some service that monitor them, if you're bigger and you have a bigger problem and you need to do some other things and strategize about how that could work, then it's easier to crowd out negative content with positive or neutral content than it is to get removed. So
and John, just very quickly, because I know we're running out of time, that's the exact thing we've told a lot of clients when they have this defamation. It's coming up on page 1, is work with John, get your business in certain online directories, join 2 or 3 local chambers of commerce so your website comes up on page 1 on that, put out press releases, perhaps sponsor the local Boys and Girls Club with a link back to your website, all these different things that when Google does a search, hopefully those come up before any of the negative reviews.
Right. Good. So we do have a couple questions I want to address, and I never answer this one out of the front, but Josh asked if we're going to have a recording of this, and we will. It'll be posted on the General Counsel site, and we'll post it on the NetStrategies site too, and we can send you out a link to that as well. Here's a trick: if you do webinars, don't tell everybody it's going to be recorded at the very beginning, because people will jump off if they kind of think that will just access a recording later, and they almost never do. So that's your very valuable marketing advice right here at the end of this webinar. There was another question. Becky had a question about very old anonymous 1-star review with no text. That just, you can tag that with Google and ask them to remove it. If there's actually nothing in the review, then it's probably something that's outside their guidelines, and it's worth actually reaching out. If you need help on logistics of it, shoot me an email, please. And I'm actually going to let me put our contact info up here. Sorry. So Merritt's email and phone are here. He's in McLean. I'm just 10 minutes down the street in Tyson's. You can give us a call or shoot us an email if you have other questions. Let me see if there's other questions here that we might. Okay, here's a good one for you, Merritt, as we wind down. One of our visitors asked here, if a business owner said they voted for a particular candidate and then folks, started calling, or so let's say someone voted for Trump, or someone said that this person voted for Trump, the business owner is a racist. How does that fit within our conversation we've been having today?
Generally, I try to avoid politics and tell all employers and businesses to absolutely avoid politics. So I think that is the first piece of advice. You just have to go through the analysis. So let's look at defamation. It is a untrue statement, so, and then also whether it be defamation per se. So, almost you take out whether or not the person voted for Trump, because that's almost irrelevant to the analysis, but you're calling the person racist. Racist could probably be defamation per se, so I think that could be actionable. The only thing that would perhaps make it a little bit more complicated is, in my opinion, anyone that voted for Trump must be a racist. Again, that's straddling the line between defamation and an opinion and defamation per se. So again, I think you need to be careful and have an attorney look at it and do the analysis.
Okay, let's do one last question here as we're winding down. This is from Jeff. If an employee refuses to sign a separation agreement, what tools do we have to get them to sign?
The only tool you have to have them sign a separation agreement, I mean, there are perhaps a few. So number one, you're providing them separation of payment. So you're giving them 1 week, 2 week severance pay, 3 week severance pay, depending on the circumstances. So that extra $1,000, $2,000 is the consideration. Again, it's a contract. And that contract needs to have consideration, and the consideration is the money, and the contract, or the terms, whether it is a release from any potential liabilities, it's the non-disparagement, perhaps it even has non-compete, non-solicitation provisions.
Right.
If they don't want to sign it, you can't force them to. So it's providing them that money. It is, things that you can provide them in that regard. Otherwise, you can't force it.
Right. Okay, great. All right. So there was one question about Glassdoor that we'll address as the last one. With Glassdoor, we haven't been asked to try to get reviews removed. We have helped people with strategies to try to get more positive reviews. I would check their terms of service and see if there's something in there that would be, something that you could point out to Glassdoor that it was in violation. Again, if it's not, it's really tough to get a review down if it doesn't fit these types of things that we've been talking about here. So, I think it's 12. I think you all have been a wonderful audience. Most of you are still here, which is lovely. A lot of great questions. Merritt, do you have any final words before we land the plane?
No, I think it's just reiterating what we've said as we've gone along. Take things step by step, be measured in your response, and it's don't be a hammer. Work with your clients, as need be, consult an attorney, and any business really that is dealing with customers and is on the internet should be working with a marketing strategy, a company like NetStrategies. So I think that's something you need to be working with.
Yeah, absolutely. Same on the legal side. The things up front to kind of protect yourself can help. So you all have our contact info. We'll reach out about posting the recording of this, and I'll see about slides as well. Thank you, and have a great rest of your Thursday. And thanks, Merritt.
Thank you. Enjoy the warm weather.
Yeah, perfect day. Perfect day.
Bye-bye.
All right, take care.